Assalamu alaikum. So in the last lecture we were talking about visualizing data, and we talked about graphs and how figures are manipulated to lie about their or give a psychologically incorrect impression of their performances. Now this lecture is going to talk about tabular data. Now tabular data is useful because tables are always necessary, they help to present numbers, and it is especially useful in multivariate data. So consider this table for instance. Now this table has several countries that he is comparing in relation to the area, density, birth rate, population, mortality, and GDP. Now if you look at the columns, you would notice, well, they are related. For instance, the density column is a ratio of the population per area. So if you divide the population with the area, you get the density. So if I was to order the columns, I would put population first, then area, then density. Now the other thing which is related is birth rate and death rate or mortality. For instance, you can see here that Afghanistan has the highest mortality rates, but that's not highlighted, that's somehow hidden. China has the largest population, but that's somehow hidden in this entire. It is presented is that the information is there in the table, but it's not highlighted per se, it's not openly visible. Now one thing we could do is we could put population first, then area, and then density, because they all are related to one another. And then we could put birth rate and mortality together and then GDP, or the GDP could be placed even at the beginning. The other thing you could do is, if you notice here, there's no sense of order in the countries. They're not ordered in any particular way. Australia comes at the bottom. How alphabetically it could come at the top. There is no order which is followed in this table. So one thing you could do, you could order the columns so that those that are related to one another come together. You could order the rows in any particular fashion that you want to present. I would suggest in this case just order them alphabetically. There is one other thing which people tend to forget or have never used in their work, and that is justify. Now if you look, if I quickly go here and I open up any Word document, now within the Word document here, for instance, whenever I make a table, okay, so I'm inserting a table here, okay, and I write quickly things down, okay, they don't have to have any meaning whatsoever, and I put numbers here. Let's say I put numbers here, okay. One thing people have never used is, if you go to the Home tab, there are three things here. This is left justified, so people have used this a lot. Then there's this center aligned, and center aligned is something useful. Let's say if there's a serial number and you want to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, then I guess it's, although it should be on the right hand side, but as an example, I mean, this makes sense, right? To have a serial number like this. This somehow does make sense. But here's the other thing. So people have used the center alignment, which is this. People have used left alignment, which is this. But here's the thing, there is this right alignment. Very few people have ever used that. Now this is extremely useful in numbers. Now notice what I'm going to do from here if I right align it. You see this? Aligning it on the right hand side clearly shows me that this is the largest number and this is the smallest. So aligning it on the right hand side is extremely useful for numbers, and that's the reason they have it here. A lot of people don't focus on that. But in continuing the same presentation where we were talking about tables, so the first thing we've discussed was order the rows based on any particular order. Don't keep them unordered. That doesn't help. The other thing is ordering the columns based on what is important or what is related. And number 3, right align these numbers and then see what happens. You could also use emphasis of font or color to highlight important entries. So let's look over here. Notice the first thing, all of them are right aligned. So you have population, area, density coming together. Then you have mortality, GDP, and then birth rate. Now this gentleman has put it this way because in his eyes, these things are more important. Now the other thing you see here is the important entries, or the largest entry in each column is highlighted. It is bold, and that's useful. So, and it is all right aligned, so you do have a sense of which is bigger and which is smallest in this entire framework. And notice here, this is now ordered in relation to their alphabetical order. So even tables, when you present your information, just don't put tables. Make it, highlight important areas, right align the columns, especially which are numbers. Put the columns in order so that it is useful. Things are related, and there's a smooth transition from one column to another. There's a natural transition. Here are some additional charts. All of these are the same. They're line charts, or one for another. Which one is better? Which depends to use the one which is usually used in that framework. Scatter plots are very useful. For instance, these are 2 scatter plots. They present exactly the same information. However, if I see this with this is more useful because it's presenting some insight. For instance, I can see most, as I move away from this center of the ellipse, as I move in any direction, okay, this is the major axis, this is the minor axis. So if I move away in any direction, the concentration of the points reduce. Here everything looks the same. So from here to here, the only difference we've done is that for any given point here, we have reduced the size of that point. And simply by doing that, there are some patterns that are visible now which were not visible here. Similarly, heat maps are useful. You can see there is no difference that one can see here, although it's the same graph. Everything is the same. However, having color points, or different color points, or tells you the density in a different coloring, does help you elaborate certain key elements which would otherwise have been just faded away. Here's another example where he's used a third dimension. So every point is a point along the x and y axis, but the third dimension is the size of the point, where the size of the point is in relation to the population. Obviously, China and India have the largest population, therefore their circle is the largest. I'm from Pakistan, so you can see Pakistan close by here. And you can see in terms of life expectancy and the GDP per person, although it's much smaller in terms of population, it's a little better than India. Okay, so that's my patriotic component saying that. So it is a little better than India as for this particular graph or Gapminder. Which ones are better, bar plots or pie chart? It depends. If you have to compare different years, bar chart is obviously better. You can see them all stacked up here, and you can see the relationship here better presented. But if you want to show within the same year the relationship of one with the other, pie charts is the way to go. Which pie chart is better? Now, looking at what we've discussed before, especially in the last video lecture, you can have an idea which one is better. Which ones are better? Histograms. Now, histograms are very good in visualizing data. However, look at this particular graph. Now, all of them contain, all the top three and contain the same information, and the bottom three contain the same information. But look at the bin size. Smaller bin size tend to fade away or hide some of the key characteristics which are visible in smaller bin sizes. So this is the smaller bin size, C now, and this is even smaller. So the bin size matters a lot in histogram. Two histograms showing the same information do not necessarily look the same. The bin size matters. Frequency versus density histograms, you can see they're pretty similar. That's the same information. They look the same. Okay, consider this as an example. Now, box and whisker plots are very useful because in any particular box plot, you have the upper quartile, the lower quartile, and the medium shown to you in the entire data. So they are very useful and they are excessively used in life sciences. Another plot that is worth is whether it's worthwhile to have a stacked area versus line plots. It depends, but what is worthwhile is that it is hard to see trends in middle areas of the stack. They are worthwhile seeing as a line plot. And as an example, really, if you want to see trends, a very good example is Google Trends is a website which, no, let me show this to you. So if you go to Google Trends and you click here, and this is an excellent website, a lot of people are not aware of this, is that Google Trends can help you see the top search queries in Google search across various regions and languages. And it is useful in showing how people got interested in something. So for instance, if I write here cricket, and cricket is again, there is a cricket wireless company in the US, but cricket as a search term in general, and I compare it with the world baseball, which is a similar game. Let's see how the trends look like. Now I'm going to compare this with baseball here. And I'm looking at it as a search term, and I write baseball here. And I compare it with, let's say, well, these two are similar, but, and I see the trend. You can see here that baseball has been searched significantly larger number of times than cricket over the past 12 months. But that is because we're looking in the United States, because baseball is popular in the United States. Actually, it's mostly played in the United States. But if I see the worldwide comparison, I would expect cricket to score higher. Actually, yes, and you can see here the blue line here represents cricket, whereas the red represents baseball. Now, baseball looked higher because it is popular in the United States, but now we're looking at worldwide. But if you look over, let's say, 2004 to now, which is the entire life cycle, which is good more than like 15 years, and you see the trend. Okay, it's taking some time to present the information here. This is how the trend looks like. And you can see the baseball trend is pretty similar. It looks very similar. There are baseball season when it gets interesting and then it comes down. It gets up and gets down. But cricket does match a similar trend, but it has improved, and it is improving because right about here you had a change in the cricket format, is that people started watching smaller and smaller matches. So now the span of a particular match is much smaller, but baseball has remained pretty stagnant throughout the course of time. And notice here they're using lines. So here as well, going back to the same, it is more useful to see these trends as lines rather than stacked graphs. So going back to the lecture again, you see that even Google Trends uses lines to show these trends rather than stacked up areas, because there's a lot of information loss, or there's a lot of things you can't really see, especially in the middle. And those trends, they are not really visible. For instance, miscellaneous here is at the top. So it gives the false impression that it's, it's bigger than all of these. But if you look at miscellaneous here, it's really lying here at the bottom. Stacked, again, this is a good example where stacked does, I guess, help, but in both cases it presents the same information. However, which one do you think is more important? If you look closely, the bottom, each column here represents so each column here represents first class, second class, and third class. But notice here in a fraction, things are more visible. It shows here that if you were in Titanic in third class, you were more likely to die because they didn't care about the third class's survival as first class. Because in first class, 60% of the people survived. In second class, 40% of the people survived. In third class, 20%. I mean, 80% of the people died, which showed earlier on the ticket that you bought also gave you bad services. The smaller the value of your ticket means bad services, but also less likely you survive in case something bad happens. Here are some examples. Which coloring is better? It depends. It's better to have something light on one side so you can have two sides clearly differentiated. But really, going back to what was important is really to maximize data ink ratio, minimize the light factor, get rid of any chart dunk, and use proper scales and labeling. Now, this is very good example of chart junk, which is very hard to understand. This shows Napoleon's advance and retreat. It's very hard to understand it today. This is an example of too much. For instance, this is an example. These are bad examples of pie chart and histogram charts and use of colors. You don't need to use that many colors. There is absolutely no need to make it three-dimensional here. Or I don't even know what's the purpose of oval charts. But it is useful to use, in this case, for instance, if you really see there, it looks as an amazing diagram, visually appealing, but notice the color is the same. The relative intensity of the color has changed. Or you could say it is dark. They're using different shades of the same color pattern, and it does help. It looks appealing, it presents the information, and again, the diagram looks nice. You want to see it. But if you see this, that's a dramatic abuse of colors. But this is an impressive example of using chart junk. There's just so much information here that you can't even really figure out what this guy is saying. And percentage change in 5-year attendance, you can't really figure what out. What is this saying really? What's the purpose of having a world behind this whole picture? Labeling matters. Use of nice label does matter. Notice that they've shown these number on the left, but they've also put a number at the top of each column. And this is an example of a beautiful infographic, but there's just too much information here. There's so much information here that it's hard to figure out what's going what. That is pretty much the end of this lecture. I hope you like what I've taught. This is my way of telling students that we're going back to the drawing board, and there is something called infographics, is how you present information in a graphical way, and how to make sure that your information is more understandable and appealing to the reader, so the reader, and highlights key areas. Now, there is an assignment associated with this, and it is a major assignment. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you learn this using this new domain called infographic to the best of your use. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.